But without further ado, I want to introduce our next speaker, Bryan Mori, who's a wildlife biologist and has the firm Biological Consulting Services. And Bryan graduated right here from UCSC in 1988 with a degree in environmental studies and is a certified wildlife biologist with the Wildlife Society. He has practiced biological consulting for 37 years. Ooh, excuse me. First, as a wildlife, I don't know why that's doing that, but I know that's no fun to listen to. So he's practiced biological consulting for 37 years, first as a wildlife biologist with the Habitat Restoration Group, then independently since 1993. His area of expertise focuses on performing habitat assessments and surveys for special status amphibians and birds, such as the California tiger salamander, the Santa Cruz long-toed salamander, and the marbled murrelet. He's been a part of a lot of special projects, including management of the Santa Cruz Mountains Marbled Murrelet Monitoring Program sponsored by the California State Parks, long-term management of bullfrogs at Packard Ranch, as well as in late spring 2026, working with the Tamiya Nation on a 235-acre ancestral land return site to provide a baseline inventory of wildlife resources and contribute in developing a management plan focusing on riparian and native grassland restoration, maintenance of landscape with cultural fire, wetland restoration, and environmental education. Welcome, Bryan.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for the invitation to share my perspectives on yellow-legged frogs in the San Lorenzo. And thank you for being here and having interest in hearing about yellow-legged frogs. We've got good weather for amphibian talk, so it's a good omen. So I'm going to just assume that there's a fraction of you that aren't familiar with the yellow-legged frogs, so I'm going to go into first a little bit of its endangerment status, a little bit of biology, natural history, and then we'll move into occurrences in the San Lorenzo watershed, and then my impressions of what they're doing and how they're doing. So to first start off, this map comes from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's status review report to the Fish and Game Commission. And what it does is it shows you the distribution of foothill yellow-legged frogs in California. The boundaries are based on historic range. The colored areas represent clades, and clades are groups where individuals share a common ancestry and certain genetic markers that are unique to that particular population. So in a sense, this is kind of a simple genetic diversity map of foothill yellow-legged frogs. So in that status report, it was determined that just over 50% of foothill yellow-legged frogs have been extirpated from historic known sites. That, along with identification of ongoing threats and potential future threats to existing populations, prompted the Fish and Game Commission to list 5 of the 6 clades as either threatened or endangered. So going back to this, okay, so the clade that's presented in orange, that's where our local populations are represented in that, which is called the West Central Coast Clade. All right, so the Fish and Game Commission listed 5 of the 6 clades as either threatened or endangered, and the West Coast Central Clade, ours is listed as endangered and is protected under the State Endangered Species Act and is protected from take, and that's the definition of take for the state. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service followed in August of 2023, and they have a little bit of different nomenclature. They don't use clades. In terms of their management units, they call them distinct population segments, and they listed 4 of 5 clades. They don't recognize the 6 that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife recognizes, but 4 of the 5 clades are listed as threatened or endangered. The Central Coast Distinct Population Segment is listed as threatened. It's a grade lower than endangered, but it still receives full protection under the Federal Endangered Species Act from take. And their definition right there, it's very similar to that of the state, but basically no harming the species. So we'll go into a little bit of natural history, biology, and identification. It's a rather smallish, medium-sized frog, easily fit into the palm of your hand. A large adult would be about 3.5 inches from snout to the rear end. And it's pretty drab. Most of the coloration is going to be in your browns and grays and olives. And basically it's intended to camouflage the frog. It's really hard, unless you're really focusing on it and it's moving, you actually could be standing right above it and not see it. It just blends so well with the substrate. Again, here's another variation. This one has a little bit more olive green in it. And again, this is an adult, and you can see its size relative to the palm, not very large. And there aren't very, it's actually doesn't have a lot of distinctive characteristics where, for instance, with the red-legged frog that also co-occurs with the yellow-legged frog, you'll notice that it has these distinct ridges that go from the eye along the dorsolateral sides of the back. And so when you see that, you know that that's a red-legged frog. The bullfrog, if all else fails, I mean, first size will just give it away itself, but if that fails, you'll notice that behind the eye there's that large tympanum membrane, the eardrum, and it's usually, most of the time, larger than the eye. So if all else fails, if you see a large tympanic membrane on a frog, then you've got a bullfrog. And the tree frog, I don't have it's interesting that it's such an ubiquitous species, but I don't have a very good picture of one. Anyhow, there's a dark line that goes across the eyes from the nose to the back of the eye. And if you see that in a frog, then you know that that's a tree frog. And another species that co-occurs with the yellow-legged is the toad, the western toad. And toads just look like toads, right? I mean, you can just... Anyways, if all else fails, you've got the stripe that goes down the center of the back, and that's your western toad. So, yellow-legged frogs are river obligate breeding species. They're not pond frogs or frogs of marshes, lakes. They need the rivers. And this is a characteristic photo of optimal breeding habitat. You've got open canopy such that there's plenty of sunlight to penetrate to the bottom of the stream course. A lot of cobbles and boulders and riffle habitat. Another photo, typical breeding habitat. Cobble bars are a distinct feature, and most of the time the frogs will be found along the edges of the stream, and sometimes resting on a rock in the center. But plenty of sunlight, that's the main characteristic. Plenty of sunlight, cobbles. Okay, so we are right now in the midst, probably the height of the breeding season. This year we've not had very many late heavy rains, so when the winter flows start to subside, that's when the adults start to migrate towards traditional breeding sites. Males will generally arrive first. They are very territorial and show strong site fidelity, which means that they'll return to the same sites year after year. So on Wednesday was the first time that I actually was able to hear a yellow-legged frog calling. And my first experience was back in '94, and it's been off and on since then. But all the times that I've gone out, it's usually been out during the daytime. And so I tried this different methodology that's been proposed of doing nighttime surveys for the yellow-legged frog. And so just on Wednesday night, we went out, and I heard my first ones. They're just this really short, and because it's in riffle habitat, you're competing with the turbulent sound of the water. So it's not distinct. You don't hear it very loudly, but it's there. And so I was surprised and really excited about it. But I didn't have a recorder to obviously record that. So I've got a couple of recordings here from the website californiaherps.com, which if you're at all interested in amphibians and reptiles, that is the site to go to. It's really a wonderful site. Let me see if I can get the, is there, where's, oh, I see, look at my screen. There we go. Here we go. Okay. So these are calls that are heard out of water. They do calls both in water and out of water. Oh, okay. Go back. So I just touched this.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. So you hear that? Like a duck or something in the. Okay, so now we're going to hear calls from underwater. Really elegant adaptation, right? When you think about the fact that they actually are occurring in a riffle habitat where they're doing their breeding, and you're competing with that sound of water, to be able to have underwater vocalization. Anyhow, so the males, like I said, arrive first, and here are pictures of male and female. They're in an amplexus. Okay, the females will select the site for egg deposition, and apparently it's been recorded a few times that they prepare the deposition site by using their hind legs to scrape off the previous year's algae and so forth for better egg adhesion. And so here are two egg masses. The one on the right is fresh, probably about a day or two old. You can tell by its really dark eggs. And then the gelatinous mass is really crystalline, clear. The other one is probably, I don't know, maybe close to a few days, a week old, and it's already collecting silt. And over time it will have algae growing on the outside and more silt, and so when you see it, it's really hard to kind of determine it from just kind of like a mass of algae sometimes. So usually 300 to 1,200 eggs, and the eggs are laid usually along the edges of the riffle, along the stream bed where the velocity is slower. Oftentimes the eggs are laid on the leeward side of boulders, so they're not getting the brunt of the flow. And they're pretty shallow too. Usually within about a foot you'll see these. and the one egg mass per female, and that's something that's sort of recently been discovered through radio tracking, telemetry tracking. In the past, it was kind of up in the air whether they'd actually produce more than one egg mass, but knowing this, it helps to create a situation where you can do really good monitoring, so you can just count your egg masses in a certain stretch of creek and then determine how many females are present. And so you can do that and monitor that year after year consistently. So the tadpoles will emerge anywhere from 5 to 30 days, and it depends on temperature. The colder the water temperature is, the slower that hatching takes place. Here we have an egg mass that's already, you can see the tadpoles, they're all just hanging on, basically. When they're first hatched out, they look like debris. They're just kind of like there, and some of them are on the floor of the creek bed. They're not moving or anything. And they stick around the egg mass for about a week or so, and then they start to feed on the algae and the other growth on the egg mass itself. So here's the more familiar form. I took this, I stuck my phone in really quickly to try to get an underwater photo. And so that's why it's a little bit blurred, but I don't recommend that, but you've got to you don't have time to focus when your phone is underwater. So anyhow, growth rates are higher when the temperatures are in the sort of mid-60s to 70s. Colder temperatures, slower growth rate. And here's a tadpole feeding on algae, and you can see that it's already developing its hind legs, it's metamorphosing. There is difference in terms of rate of growth with the type of algae that's consumed. There are some algae that have a higher protein content, faster growth rate, and then there are that are lower. And eventually, in about 3 to 4 months, you get the metamorphosed young of the year, which is probably only about a ½ inch to an inch at the most when they're young of the year. They will remain close to the breeding habitat for most of the remaining part of the breeding season until probably the first fall rains, when they start to disperse. Okay, so following the breeding season, habitat use will vary in terms of where the adults might hang out. The females actually will move soon after they lay their eggs. They'll kind of move back towards their overwintering habitat and so forth. So you'll see them use other habitats such as pools and so forth, glides, not necessarily riffles. There are those that remain on the main stem, and I wonder sometimes about that, because that's where, of course, during the wintertime, you're going to get the brunt of your flows, and so you've got to have cover such that you can withstand that for the season. So here's a situation where actually this is a rock gabion structure. It's a bunch of cobbles and boulders that are wired together, and the property owner had actually placed this in the creek without a permit, and so he had to take it out. So when they were taking this out, and this is back in November, so you're already thinking at that time the adults are already in their areas where they're going to probably spend the rest of the winter. So this was taking place in November, and as they were pulling this out, sure enough, 2 adult frogs did leap out of there. So this just gives you an idea of kind of what they're looking for in terms of cover during the winter period if you're in the main stem. Otherwise, they'll be using smaller tribs where the stream flow is less. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of movement ecology. So females move farther distances than males. And so locally, and this is from a study in the Coyote Creek watershed, they had a female move up to 1.6 miles between the breeding site and their overwintering site. And I'm always fascinated by these distances that they've been recorded at moving. You know, when you think about a little frog that's just having to deal with going over boulders and other woodland debris and so forth, and it's just astounding. I'm never lack of amazement there. At the farthest recorded was 7,043 meters. That, to me, that's just, this is a study from the Northwest, and that 4-mile distance is pretty amazing. It's hard for me to believe. The movement of the young of year is poorly understood, partially because they are so small that you can't really get radio tags of the sufficient size to be able to track them. But in terms of anecdotal information, they have been seen 1,000 feet outward from the creek during the first fall rains. But some actually do hang around the main stem or their breeding sites, as I kind of found out when I went back to a site this spring and I saw young of year, maybe about about an inch or so, that were still over in the breeding sites. So it's really just poorly understood of how they move about the landscape. And they live about 12 years or longer based on tracking studies. They reach sexual maturity in about a couple of years. And for those that are just wondering how they do those tracking studies, here is a juvenile bullfrog that has a transmitter, the chain belt around its waist and that tail. And so that's how that goes. Okay, so here are some of the factors that are implicated in the decline of the species. So historically, in the west slope of the Sierras, you had hydraulic mining where you'd have whole hillsides just blasted away by these large, powerful hoses and just devastating the landscape permanently, really. Then you have hydroelectric developments, dams, of course, that impacts their habitat both upstream and downstream. It becomes a regulated flow downstream, and then when they do release flows, it might not be at the time that is optimal for the yellow-legged frog. So you've got that alteration both upstream and downstream. Of course, flood control projects, and if you live in an urbanized area, you know what that means. It means everything is reamed out and you have concrete channels instead of riparian habitat. There is a very serious fungal disease called chytridiomycosis, chytrid for short, thankfully. That's an eyeful and a mouthful. And so the spores of this fungus embed themselves in the skin of the frog, which then they develop their fruiting bodies and then they produce more spore. But anyways, in that life cycle, it causes devastation to certain populations of amphibians around the world. Unfortunately, the yellow-legged frog is one of those populations that are very sensitive to it. And then, of course, you have extreme flood events, especially in the breeding season. I'm kind of glad that this rain is actually kind of a little petering out right now. It's not as big as what I thought it would be, because the eggs are, like I said, they are out there, and if you get a late big rainstorm, you're going to wash away that year's effort in eggs and larvae. So, so they have to deal with that part of it. And of course, the extreme drought that speaks for itself. There are pesticides used in agriculture that are detrimental to tadpoles. You've got non-native predators like bullfrogs that prey on the smaller native frogs. The bullfrog larvae also outcompete the larvae of the yellow-legged frogs. And also they are one of those species that actually are tolerant of the chytrid fungal disease. So they become this reservoir. They'll have it on them. They just won't succumb to the disease. So what happens is that they will then spread chytrid to other species, vulnerable species. And of course, on top of that, you still have your native predators, like garter snakes, newts, and aquatic insects that might forage on the larvae. And I just got a couple of pictures here of our native. This is what would happen just out of normal course. You have your newt, rough-skinned newt, consuming here, not yellow-legged frog tadpole, I mean eggs, but those of a tree frog. Of course, the garter snake. This one actually has a sculpin. Good luck. With those spines, you know. And of course this garter snake actually, this is a two-stripe down in San Luis Obispo County, but it co-occurs with yellow-legged frogs. And here could be the result of chytrid infection. It's hard to tell. I didn't collect it. I'm not, allowed to collect without a permit, or at least a valid permit. Right now, everything's impending, but I'm not going to violate my permit and start doing things I'm not supposed to. But anyhow, this is what you'll see: is that you'll see frogs that are, they're dead, but they're not showing signs of like part of a predation event or something. Like limbs aren't missing, head isn't missing, or anything like that. So these two I took a picture of this year. Okay, so we'll go into historical records of yellow-leggeds in the San Lorenzo.
2 minutes? Is that
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
We have a little wiggle room, but
okay. Okay, so here are the historical records, and I'm calling historical records and everything from 1960s, pre-1960s. And this is where some of those observations have been recorded. And this is post-1960s. So over the last, close to 60 years, only one observation. And actually this observation is somewhat questionable, but anyhow, it doesn't take much, you don't have to be a consultant or anything to look at that and realize, okay, that either the species is in serious trouble, something's up. But based on my experience and those of other consultants that have worked through the San Lorenzo watershed over the decades, we think that the frog is just simply extirpated, that it no longer occurs. It no longer occurs as a breeding species in the San Lorenzo River watershed. I haven't seen one in the 30 years that I've been doing surveys of different types, whether it's steelhead, red-legged frog surveys, pre-construction surveys for certain emergency type projects. They haven't been around. And I was going to go into, well, these are the different types of studies that have been conducted over the decades that I've been working. And of course, the main body of evidence would be the steelhead surveys that have been conducted by Don Alley and others. We've got ongoing data for, since the 1990s, mid-1990s, and throughout all those years, nothing has turned up. And I'll just kind of skip to the next one so that this just shows you that the status report also suggests that the red and black dots in our Santa Cruz area are either extirpated or possibly extirpated. That was their finding as well. These are the results from the San Lorenzo River steelhead monitoring. And you can see that with the red dots represent foothill yellow-legged frog observations. In the San Lorenzo watershed, nothing. And so that all those pictures from that I was showing you, those are from the SoCal River watershed. That's the only confirmed breeding drainage in the county as of now. How much time do I have? Actually, I'm probably over that 2 minutes.
We're over, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But we're running a break.
What was that?
We're headed into a break.
Headed into a break. So maybe we can just kind of go into questions or discussions. Yeah.
Sure. Can I just go ahead and, I don't know if I need the mic or something? Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really sad to, I thought the pictures were from our watershed, right? And then we find out, oh no, we don't have any left. So so I was wondering, is this sort of like a keystone species? Is it, and how can we possibly rejuvenate the species? Is that even possible in the San Lorenzo watershed? Because here we are there things that we can do? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a complicated question because actually it's really, okay, so going back to those historic records, it's hard to determine how the population was actually doing at that time. A lot of the information I got from the California Natural Diversity Database, all it tells you is museum specimen, individuals, several individuals. There was only really one record that I saw that said adult in April. So that tells me that there was some breeding going on, but it's hard to say how robust that population is. And so as far as reintroducing and such, so that's where the complexity comes in, or complication comes in, because not knowing exactly why they petered out here in the San Lorenzo watershed, when you look at it relative to development on the Santa Clara side, right, you still have some tributaries that have yellow-legged frog populations, and their landscape has been altered so much more intensively, which kind of tells me that maybe what, I'm just kind of throwing this, I'm just thinking out loud kind of thing, that the Santa Clara Valley may have been maybe the source population, and then from there some of our populations started to develop, so there were maybe more of the peripheral and satellite kinds, where you are more susceptible to, blinking in and out of extinction. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of returning them, I don't know. I think we kind of have to figure out perhaps what might have happened. I have an idea, because if your last record is from like the 1960s, Lexington Reservoir stopped, it was constructed in 1957. And I'm thinking that if what I'm thinking about being the source and then coming over to our side of the range, I'm thinking that probably impacted, migration into the area. That along with, of course, just that whole intense urbanization, from Los Gatos downward. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but it's kind of a difficult in terms of reintroduction. Yes.
And thank you so much, Brian. I think that's all of the time we have for questions.